I was 8 years old when I first realized that the world saw me differently. It wasn't because of something my parents told me or a lesson in school. It was because of a birthday party. A boy in my class, Jason, had invited everyone. I remember how excited I was when I got the invitation, clutching it in my small hands, running home to show my mom. She smiled, said I could go, even helped me pick out a gift. On the day of the party, I put on my best outfit, my sneakers fresh and clean. My mom drove me across town to Jason's house, a big white two-story home with a perfectly cut lawn and a long driveway filled with parked cars. I walked up to the door with my gift in hand, nervous but excited. I rang the doorbell, expecting Jason or his parents to greet me. But when the door opened, his mother stood there, her face tightening the moment she saw me. She looked me up and down, glanced past me at my mother waiting in the car, then back at me. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake," she said. I frowned, confused. "Jason invited me?" She pursed her lips. "I don't think so. We're just keeping this a small group, you understand." I didn't understand, but I understood the way she was looking at me, the way she kept glancing past me at my mother, as if waiting for her to come retrieve me, the way the warmth in her voice was forced, her hand already moving to close the door. I didn't argue, I just nodded, turned around, and walked back to the car, my heart heavy, my stomach twisting in a way I couldn't explain. When I got in, my mother didn't ask what happened. She just reached over and took the gift from my hands, setting it gently on the seat between us. "Our people will never see you as one of them," she said, staring straight ahead, her hands gripping the wheel. "And that's not your fault. That was the first time. But it wouldn't be the last. By the time I was 13, I'd learned to expect it. I learned to expect the way store clerks followed me when I walked into a shop, watching me as if waiting for me to steal something. I learned to expect the way teachers assumed I wasn't in the honors class, even when I had the highest grades. I learned to expect the way my friends' parents hesitated when I was invited over, how they looked at me with careful, measuring eyes before deciding whether I was one of the good ones. Then, when I was 16, I learned that sometimes it wasn't just stares or hesitations. It was a Friday night, and I was walking home from my part-time job at a bookstore. I had taken that route 100 times, the shortcut through the park saving me 10 minutes. The streets were quiet, the distant hum of traffic the only sound. I had my hoodie up. It was cold, and my hands were stuffed in my pockets. I was just a block away from home when I heard the siren. Flashing lights bathed the street in red and blue. A police cruiser pulled up beside me, the driver's window rolling down. "Stop right there," a voice commanded. I froze. My heart pounded as I slowly turned. Two officers stepped out, hands near their holsters. "Where you headed?" "Home," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I live right down the street." "Got any ID?" I reached for my wallet carefully, remembering every conversation my mother had drilled into me since I was a kid. "Move slow, keep your hands visible, don't argue, don't give them a reason." I handed over my school ID. One officer glanced at it while the other kept his eyes on me. "We got a call about a suspicious person in the area," he said. "You match the description." I swallowed hard. "What's the description?" The officer's jaw tightened. "Just be smart, kid. Get home." I took my ID back, my fingers trembling. I walked the rest of the way without looking back. When I got home, my mother was waiting by the door, her face tight with worry. "I saw the lights," she said. I nodded, my throat dry. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I need you to be careful." "I didn't do anything wrong," I whispered. You know," she said. "But that doesn't mean anything to them." By the time I reached college, I had learned how to carry it. The weight of being watched, the weight of proving myself over and over again. At my university, I was one of the few black students in my program. In my first seminar, the professor called on me to speak about diversity, even though the topic of discussion had nothing to do with it. In my study groups, I noticed how my ideas weren't taken seriously until someone else repeated them. At parties, I watched how campus security ignored the drunken white students stumbling around, but always seemed to keep an eye on me, even when I was just standing there. Then came the job interviews. I walked into corporate offices in my best suit, my resume polished, my experience undeniable. And still, I heard the same questions, the same careful phrasing. Wow, you're so well-spoken. Are you sure this is the right field for you? Diversity is really important to us. One time, after an interview I thought had gone well, I got an email meant for someone else. It was between the hiring managers. Seems qualified, but I don't know if he's the right fit for the company culture. The right fit. That's what they always called it. I got the job somewhere else. I worked harder than anyone else. I became the best at what I did, and yet I still heard the same things. At a company retreat, a senior executive drunkenly laughed and said, "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just here to fill a quota." At an industry conference, a client assumed I was part of the catering staff instead of one of the keynote speakers. At a meeting, a colleague referred to me as the black guy in the department instead of using my name. Some days I let it roll off my back. Some days it felt like an avalanche pressing down on my chest. Then one day I got an email from a younger employee, a black intern. "I see what you go through," he wrote. "I don't know how you deal with it." I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I wrote back, "I deal with it because I have to, because if I don't, they win. But that doesn't mean I accept it." I pressed send, and I realized that maybe the biggest act of defiance wasn't just surviving in spaces that weren't built for me. Maybe it was refusing to be silent about it. I used to think that once I reached a certain level, once I had the degree, the job, the respect, things would be different. That racism would be a relic of the past, something that couldn't touch me anymore. But I was wrong. It didn't disappear. It just changed shape. It started with a meeting, a big one. I had been working at the company for 2 years, proving myself every day, making sure my work was flawless, staying late, going above and beyond. This was my chance, a project I had spearheaded, my name on the proposal, my work that had gotten us here. The conference room was packed with executives. I had practiced my pitch all night, rehearsed every possible question. I stood at the front, confident, ready. But as I began speaking, I noticed something, the way their eyes kept shifting, not to me, but to the man sitting beside me. Mike. My colleague. My white colleague. I kept going, but the longer I spoke, the more it became clear they weren't listening. Not to me. Every time I finished a point, they turned to Mike. "What do you think?" they asked him, as if he had the answers, as if he was the one who had done the work. He glanced at me, uncomfortable, but he didn't correct them. He nodded, repeated what I had just said, and suddenly they were engaged. Suddenly, it was a great idea. I finished my presentation, my hands clenched at my sides. When the meeting ended, one of the executives patted Mike on the back. "Great work," he said. He didn't even look at me. That night I sat in my car for a long time before driving home. A week later, Mike got promoted. I didn't. When I asked my manager why, he smiled the way people do when they're about to say something they think is harmless, but really isn't. "You're doing great work," he said. But leadership is about perception. People need to feel comfortable with who's in charge. Comfortable. I swallowed the words I wanted to say and nodded. That was the moment I knew that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I achieved, there would always be someone deciding whether I fit. It didn't stop there. A few months later, I was up for another opportunity, a leadership role. I had the experience, the results, the backing of my team. I went into the interview confident. The hiring manager smiled. "We're really impressed," he said, "but we're looking for someone who's a better culture fit." Culture fit, another word for not you. I went home that night and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. How many times had I been told I wasn't the right fit, that I needed to make people feel comfortable, that I needed to change who I was just to be given the same opportunities? And for the first time, I asked myself, why was I still trying to fit into a space that was never built for me? I started paying attention to the conversations happening when they thought I wasn't listening, to the way certain people got invited to after-work drinks while I got told we didn't think you'd be interested, to the way I had to work twice as hard just to be seen as half as capable. Then one day, everything became clear. I was in another meeting, another room full of executives. A colleague made a joke, something about diversity hires, about how these days anyone can get a job if they check the right box. Laughter, casual, easy. My stomach twisted, but I stayed silent. That night I sat at my desk, staring at my resignation letter. My whole life I had been taught to work harder, to prove myself, to keep my head down. But I had done all of that, and it was never going to be enough. I didn't just send my resignation letter. I sent an email, a long one, detailing everything. Every instance of being overlooked, every time my voice wasn't heard, every comment, every dismissal, every moment that proved that no matter how much they praised diversity, they didn't actually want it. And then I pressed send. The fallout was immediate. Some people applauded me, some sent messages saying they had felt the same way but had been too afraid to speak up. Others told me I was overreacting, that it wasn't really about race, that I should just work harder, as if I hadn't already given everything I had. I left that company, but I didn't stop. I started speaking about it, writing about it, making sure people saw what I had seen. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to make myself smaller. For the first time, I realized that success wasn't about fitting into a world that didn't want me. It was about building a new one. Jasmine Carter had always known that the world saw her differently. She was black, she was a woman, and she was from the South, a combination that meant she had to fight twice as hard for half as much. But she was used to it. Her mother had been a civil rights activist. Her grandmother had been one of the first black nurses in their small Alabama town, and her great-grandfather had been a sharecropper who never got the land he was promised. Jasmine carried their fight with her when she became a journalist. She didn't want to write fluff pieces or report on celebrity scandals. She wanted to expose the truth. And she was about to stumble upon the biggest story of her career. It started with a missing black girl. 14-year-old Tiana Lewis had disappeared from a predominantly black neighborhood in Atlanta. Her mother, Renee Lewis, had gone to the police immediately. The response? She probably ran away. Renee insisted that her daughter wasn't a runaway. Tiana had been an honor student, a responsible girl who never missed school, and had left behind her phone, wallet, and school bag. None of it mattered to the police. They filed the report, but no search was conducted. No Amber Alert was issued. Nothing. Jasmine heard about the case from Malik, a local activist who had been trying to bring attention to the growing number of missing black girls in the city. "Nobody cares when it's us," he told her. "The media won't touch it, the cops don't investigate, and these girls just disappear." Jasmine felt a familiar anger burning in her chest. She promised Malik she would look into it. She had no idea what she was about to uncover. She started by talking to the families of other missing black girls. The pattern was chilling. Most of the girls were between the ages of 12 and 17. They had no history of running away. They all disappeared from the same 3 neighborhoods. And in every single case, the police had dismissed it. No signs of foul play. Teenagers disappear all the time. They'll come back eventually. but they never did. Jasmine wrote her first article, "Where are Atlanta's missing black girls?" She expected some pushback. She didn't expect what came next. The morning after the article was published, she woke up to hundreds of messages. Some were from readers thanking her for covering a story the mainstream media ignored. But others, threats, anonymous emails. "Stop digging. You don't know what you're getting into. These girls ran away. Quit making it something it's not." Jasmine wasn't scared. She was furious. If they wanted her to stop, that meant she was onto something. And she was about to dig deeper. She reached out to a source inside the police department, a black officer named Darius Porter, who had grown frustrated with the system. "What if I told you," he said, "these girls aren't just disappearing?" Jasmine's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Darius hesitated, then sighed. "I think they're being taken." Jasmine gripped the phone. "By who?" There was a long pause. "This is what I don't know, but I know this. We're not supposed to ask questions." That's when Jasmine knew this wasn't just police negligence. Something deeper was happening, and she was going to expose it. She started following leads. She spoke to social workers, school teachers, and activists. She tracked patterns, looking at missing persons reports, where the last sightings took place, and any surveillance footage she could get her hands on. And then she found something terrifying, a video. A grainy security camera clip from a gas station taken the night Tiana Lewis disappeared. In the footage, Tiana was seen getting into a black SUV, not by force, by choice. Jasmine's heart pounded as she watched. The man driving the SUV looked like a cop. She sent the footage to Darius. He called her an hour later. "That car," he said, his voice low. "It's an unmarked police vehicle." Jasmine's hands trembled. "You're sure?" But positive. It changed everything. If a cop had picked up Tiana, then this wasn't just negligence. This was a conspiracy. She went back to Malik. "I need to know who drives those SUVs." Malik nodded. "I know some people who can find out." 2 days later, he came back with a name. Detective Andrew Lawson, a white cop with a history of misconduct, accused of assaulting black suspects, multiple excessive force complaints, and, most disturbingly, he had been assigned to multiple missing persons cases. Jasmine's stomach turned. Had he been taking these girls? She needed proof, and she needed it fast. She staked out Lawson's house. It was risky, but what she saw that night shook her to her core. Lawson left his house around midnight. He drove to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Jasmine followed, keeping her distance. He parked, and then another SUV pulled up. 2 men got out, and in the back seat, a young black girl. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. He was still alive. They led the girl inside. Jasmine grabbed her phone and started recording. She didn't know what she had just uncovered, but it was bigger than she had ever imagined. She sent the footage to Darius and Malik. "This is it," Malik whispered. "This is proof." Darius was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Jasmine, you need to be careful. You don't understand how deep this goes." Jasmine clenched her jaw. "Then explain it to me." Darius sighed. "It's not just Lawson. There are more cops involved, more powerful people backing them. These girls aren't just disappearing. They're being trafficked." Jasmine felt sick. This was organized? Go ahead. And the police were in on it. She published the story, and all hell broke loose. The FBI got involved. The city erupted in protests. And Jasmine, she became a target. Her house was broken into. Her phone was hacked. And then she started getting followed. One night, a black SUV pulled up behind her as she was driving home. Her phone rang. A voice, low, steady. "This is your last warning, Miss Carter. Drop the story." Jasmine kept driving. She wasn't stopping, because these girls needed her, and she wasn't going anywhere. Weeks later, Detective Andrew Lawson was arrested. And when the case went to trial, he wasn't the only one. 6 other cops, 3 politicians, 2 wealthy businessmen. It had been a human trafficking ring, and Jasmine's reporting brought them down. The night the verdict was read, she received a text. No name, no number, just 4 words. "You saved my daughter." Jasmine smiled. She had won, and she was just getting started. Jasmine Carter had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The trafficking ring had been exposed. Cops, politicians, and businessmen had been arrested. The headlines had praised her as a fearless journalist, the woman who wouldn't back down in the face of corruption. But Jasmine knew better than to believe in fairy tale endings. She had spent too long in the trenches to think that taking down one ring would stop the system from finding new ways to prey on the vulnerable. And she was about to learn just how deep the rot ran. It started with a phone call, a blocked number. At first, she thought it was another threat. She had gotten plenty of those in the weeks following her investigation, some anonymous, some more direct. "You don't know who you're messing with. This isn't over. Drop the stories or you'll disappear like those girls." But this call was different. The voice on the other end was shaking. "Mass. Carter, my name is Lisa Daniels. I need your help. My son is missing." Jasmine hesitated. "Have you gone to the police?" A bitter laugh. "They don't care. He's black and they're saying he just ran away." Jasmine's stomach twisted. Again. Another black child missing. Another family ignored. And the police already dismissing it. She took a breath. "Tell me everything." Lisa's son, Jalen Daniels, was 16. A high school junior, star football player, straight A student. He had gone out one evening to meet friends at a nearby park. He never came home. His mother had called the police within hours. She had pleaded with them, begged them to take it seriously. They had filed the report, and that was it. No Amber Alert, no press conference, no search party. Jasmine knew the drill. If Jalen had been a white teenager from a wealthy neighborhood, his face would have been everywhere. Instead, his disappearance had been reduced to a statistic. And Jasmine wasn't about to let that happen. She started with the last known location. Jalen had been seen at Washington Park, a popular hangout spot for teens. Jasmine drove there looking for anything: cameras, witnesses, clues. She found something strange: a security camera on a nearby convenience store. She asked the owner for the footage. He hesitated. Some cops already came by asking for it. Jasmine's pulse quickened. "And?" "Only took it." Jasmine's stomach dropped. Why would the police take security footage if they weren't even investigating? Unless they knew something. Or worse, they were covering something up. She went to Darius Porter, the same cop who had tipped her off about the trafficking ring. "Darius, why would the police take security footage in a case they don't care about?" Darius didn't answer right away. His jaw was tight. "I shouldn't be talking to you about this." Jasmine stepped closer. "That means there's something to talk about." Darius sighed, looking around before lowering his voice. "There's been whispers about something happening in Washington Park. Kids disappearing. But officially, nothing's going on. No reports, no cases." Jasmine's heart pounded. "Then why take the footage?" Darius exhaled. "Because someone high up wants this buried." Jasmine stared at him. "This isn't just another missing kid, is it?" Darius shook his head. "No." She started digging. She pulled every missing person report from the past 3 years. and she found the pattern. Jalen wasn't the first black boy to go missing near Washington Park. 6 other boys, all between the ages of 15 and 18, all from the same 3 neighborhoods. None of their cases were solved. Most weren't even investigated. Jasmine knew what this meant. She had uncovered something massive, and someone didn't want her to find out the truth. The next day, she was followed. She noticed the black SUV in her rearview mirror as she drove home. It stayed behind her for 6 miles. When she pulled into a gas station, the SUV stopped at the curb. She got out of her car slowly, gripping her phone, pretending to check messages. The SUV's tinted window rolled down slightly. A man's voice, low, emotionless. "Drop the case, Miss Carter." Her hands tightened around her phone. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, "Genre's gone. You can't save him. Walk away." The window rolled up. The SUV sped off. Jasmine stood there, heart hammering. She had been threatened before, but this was different. This wasn't just a warning. This was a declaration. They were telling her Jalen was already dead, and that meant they knew exactly what had happened to him. She went to Malik. "If Melia knows something we don't," she told him. Malik nodded. "Then we need to find out what..." He called his sources, and that's when they found it. A private security company, one that patrolled Washington Park. It wasn't run by the city. It was funded by a group of wealthy business owners. Jasmine recognized one of the names. Lawrence Whitaker, a billionaire real estate mogul. A man who had political connections, private jets, and no reason to care about a poor black neighborhood. Unless he was using it for something. Jasmine went back to the park. This time she went at night. She took a camera, a microphone, and Malik as backup. And that's when they saw it. An unmarked van parked near the back entrance. 2 men loading something inside. Jasmine got closer. She snapped a photo. Then she heard it. A muffled cry coming from inside the van. Malik grabbed her arm. "Jasmine, we gotta go." But she couldn't move because she knew what was happening. Kids weren't just disappearing. They were being taken by men with money, with power, with connections. And now, they knew she had seen them. The next 48 hours were chaos. She published everything. The security company, the missing boys, the van, and then the FBI got involved. They raided a warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. Inside they found 4 black boys, alive. But one of them, Jalen Daniels. She had found him. She had saved him. But the men responsible, they were still out there. That night, she got a text. A blocked number. "You got lucky. This isn't over." Jasmine took a deep breath. No, it wasn't over. But neither was she. She had taken down one ring before. And she would do it again. No matter what it cost her. The streets of Denver, Colorado were covered in fresh snow. The air crisp with the scent of winter and something else. Something heavier, something unsaid. Naomi Brooks pulled her coat tighter around her body as she stepped off the city bus, her breath curling in the air like smoke. It was her first day at Ashford and Lane, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. She had worked for this moment her entire life, pushing through law school, passing the bar, proving again and again that she was good enough. But as she walked into the towering glass building, she already felt it. The stairs. The receptionist, a blonde woman with a tight ponytail and a forced smile, hesitated for a split second before saying, "Can I help you?" Naomi adjusted the strap of her bag. "I'm here for my first day, Naomi Brooks." The woman's eyes flickered with surprise as if the name and the face didn't match in her mind. "Oh, right, of course. one moment. Naomi had learned to recognize these moments, the pause before acceptance. It had happened in college, in law school, at every job interview. That fraction of hesitation before people recalibrated, before they rearranged their expectations to fit the reality standing in front of them. She wasn't what they expected, and that meant she had to be better. The first few weeks passed in a blur of long nights, stacks of case files, and whispered office politics. Naomi was good at her job, she knew it, and soon, so did everyone else. Clients started asking for her by name. Senior partners nodded in approval, but the cracks were always there. When she walked into meetings, people assumed she was the paralegal. When she won a case, someone always asked if she got lucky. When she spoke up in discussions, some men shifted uncomfortably, as if they weren't used to a black woman being the smartest person in the room. She swallowed it down, because this was the price of success. Or at least, that's what she told herself. Then came the Martinez case, a wrongful termination lawsuit, a Latina woman fired from her corporate job after reporting her boss for harassment. The firm was representing the company. Naomi had questions. She read through the case files, saw the inconsistencies, saw how the HR department had twisted the story, turning the victim into the problem. She brought it up in a team meeting, expecting at least a discussion. Instead, the room went silent. Then, Ethan Parker, a senior partner, chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "Naomi," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "I get that you're new, but you have to understand how these things work. Women like her always say things like this when they want a payday. Women like her." Naomi felt her pulse quicken. She looked around. No one spoke. No one challenged him, because they agreed. She was supposed to let it go, to be grateful she was in the room at all. Instead, she cleared her throat. "I don't think it's that simple." Ethan's smile tightened. "Well, fortunately, I don't pay you to think. I pay you to win cases." Laughter. A few smirks around the table. Naomi forced a smile, but something inside her snapped. That night, she stayed late. She dug deeper, pulled files HR didn't want anyone to see, found emails that told the real story. And she knew. She knew the firm was covering it up. She knew if she said something, it would cost her, because women like her weren't meant to fight back. They were meant to survive. The next morning, Naomi walked into Ethan Parker's office and placed the confidential emails on his desk. He looked at them, then at her. His face didn't change. "You really want to do this?" he asked. She did, because she wasn't like them, and she never would be. The next week, she resigned, and walked away from a six-figure salary, from the career she had spent years building, because some things mattered more, and some wars were worth fighting. Months later, when the Martinez case went public, when the firm was exposed for what it had done, Naomi sat in a small office across town, starting her own practice. Because she didn't need their approval, and she never had. The warm Los Angeles air smelled of ambition, a mix of car exhaust, expensive cologne, and a faint lingering scent of ocean salt carried from the coast. Naomi Brooks stepped out of her car, smoothing the creases of her blazer, staring up at the sleek glass building in front of her. It had been a year since she walked away from Ashford and Lane in Denver. A year since she had learned that success wasn't just about being good. It was about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Now she was in LA, starting over. This time she wasn't playing by their rules. This time she had her own. Naomi had taken a position at Harper & Moore, a law firm known for handling civil rights cases. It wasn't as flashy as corporate law, but that was the point. She wanted to fight for people who didn't have power. She wanted to make a difference. But even here, in a firm filled with people who claimed to care, the old rules still existed. The first sign came on her third case. A black actress, Kiara Jennings, had accused a major Hollywood director of sexual harassment and racial discrimination. The firm had taken the case reluctantly because they knew what it meant. Going against Hollywood's power structure wasn't just risky, it was career suicide. And the partners? They weren't ready to burn bridges. So they tried to settle quickly, quietly. Kiara wasn't happy. Neither was Naomi. "We need to take this to court," Naomi argued during a meeting. Her boss, Robert Harper, sighed, rubbing his temple. "We don't win cases like this in court," he said. Naomi narrowed her eyes. "Cases like what?" "I don't know," he muttered. "These situations. He, she said, she said." Naomi clenched her jaw. "She has proof. A few texts and a couple of witnesses who don't want to come forward," Robert said. "That's not enough." Naomi shook her head. "So what? We just let him get away with it?" Robert leaned back in his chair. "This is bigger than one case, Naomi. We have to think long term." And there it was. The truth. The same truth she had learned in Denver. They cared, but only until it got inconvenient. That night, Naomi met with Kiara in private. "He can still fight," Naomi told her. Kiara shook her head. "They don't want to. They're scared," Naomi corrected. "But I'm not." Kiara studied her. "You really think we can win?" Naomi exhaled. "I don't know. But I know we have to try." Kiara nodded, and that was all Naomi needed. The next morning, Naomi walked into the office and quit. Walked away from another firm that wanted her talent but not her fight. Walked away from playing it safe. And by that afternoon, she had filed the lawsuit herself. Against the director, against a studio that protected him, against the entire system that said women like Kiara didn't deserve justice. She had no firm backing her, no financial safety net, just her name, her reputation, and her determination. And somehow that was enough. The press picked up the case. Hollywood panicked. Kiara's story spread. More women came forward. More black actresses spoke out about the way the industry used them, discarded them, silenced them. Naomi became a problem. The studio sent offers. She refused. They sent threats. She kept going, because this time she wasn't backing down. 6 months later, they won. Not just in court, but in the public eye. The director's career was over. The studio was exposed. And Naomi? She wasn't just another lawyer anymore. She was a fighter. And she knew this was only the beginning. The streets of Boston, Massachusetts were built on revolution. Cobblestone roads, old brick buildings, and statues of men who had fought for freedom, but never for people like her. For Naomi Ellis, the city wasn't just history. It was a battlefield, not with muskets, not with bayonets, but with power. The kind of power that kept people like her out of places she had every right to be in. And tonight, that power had finally shown its teeth. She had worked years for this, a degree from Harvard, a law license that no one could deny her. And now, a job at Donovan and Moore, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. She was the first black woman they had ever hired, a symbol of progress. At least, that's what they called her when the press showed up. But behind closed doors, she was just a problem they were waiting to solve. It started small, whispers in the hallways, colleagues who suddenly forgot her name, cases she should have worked on but somehow never made it to her desk. And then, the case that changed everything. It was a wrongful termination lawsuit. A black woman fired from her job at a Boston tech company claiming racial discrimination. She had the evidence. She had the witnesses. She had Naomi, and Naomi was ready to fight. But the partners at Donovan and Moore, they weren't. They called her into a private meeting. 6 men in tailored suits, sitting across from her like judges in a courtroom she hadn't even stepped into yet. "You need to drop this case," one of them said. Naomi blinked. It's solid. She was fired because she spoke up about racism in her department. Another partner leaned forward. "This firm doesn't take cases like that." Naomi's stomach tightened. "Like what?" The silence stretched too long. Then, "Cases that make powerful people uncomfortable." She should have walked away, should have let it go. But Naomi hadn't fought her way into this firm just to sit down when they told her to. So she took the case anyway. And that's when the war began. First, they froze her out. Meetings she was supposed to be in canceled without notice. Her access to case files restricted. Partners who had once pretended to respect her now barely looked her in the eye. Then the threats started. Anonymous emails. "You don't belong here. You're ruining your career." A note slipped under her office door. "Walk away before it's too late." But Naomi had spent her whole life hearing people tell her to quit, and she had spent her whole life proving them wrong. The day before trial, she was fired. Just like that. Escorted out of the building. No explanation. No warning. Just a security guard leading her to the elevator like a criminal. And as the doors closed, she saw the partners standing in the hallway, watching. Waiting. They thought she was done. They thought they had won. But they had made a mistake. They hadn't just fired Naomi Ellis. They had created a monster. She took them to court. Donovan and Moore, the firm that had built its reputation on winning cases. Now they were the ones being sued for discrimination, retaliation, wrongful termination. Of the case, it became national news. A black woman fighting against one of the most powerful law firms in America. And Naomi, she was ready for war. The trial was brutal. They called her angry, called her unprofessional. They painted her as a troublemaker who had been fired for not being a team player. But Naomi had the truth. Emailed, statement, proof that Donovan and Moore had been working against her from the moment she took the case. And when she stood before the jury, she told them everything. How she had been silenced, how she had been threatened, how the firm had spent decades protecting powerful white men at the expense of everyone else. And when the verdict came, they lost. The settlement was millions. The firm's reputation destroyed. And Naomi, she didn't just win. She built something new. A law firm, her own, one that fought for people like the woman in her case. One that fought for every black person who had ever been told to sit down, shut up, and be grateful. And this time, she was the one making the rules. The cold air of New York City felt different when you had power. For Naomi Ellis, power was something she had spent her entire life fighting for. Not just for herself, but for every black woman who had ever been told she wasn't good enough. It had been 2 years since she had taken down Donovan Moore. 2 years since she had built her own law firm, Ellis & Associates, and now she was about to take on the biggest case of her career, a case that could either change history or get her killed. It started with a whistleblower, a young black woman named Zara James, working at Wilkes & Barrett, one of the biggest investment firms in the country. Zara had discovered something big, a multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme. Investors scammed, money laundered, and behind it all, white executives getting richer while black and brown employees were set up to take the fall. Zara had done the right thing. She had spoken up. And 2 days later, she was fired. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened next. She was followed. threatened. Her phone was tapped. Her apartment was broken into. And then she disappeared. Vanished, like she had never existed. The police called it voluntary, said there was no sign of foul play. But Naomi knew better, because women like Zara didn't just disappear. They were erased, and Naomi wasn't going to let it happen. She took the case, started digging, and the deeper she went, the uglier it got. Because Wilkes and Barrett, they weren't just any firm. They had connections to the government, to law enforcement, to people who didn't like being exposed. And now, Naomi wasn't just fighting for Zara. She was fighting against a machine designed to protect the powerful. The first warning came the next day. A phone call. Black number. Hey, a voice calm. You don't want this fight, Miss Ellis. Naomi smiled. You must not know who I am. The voice didn't flinch. Walk away, or you'll regret it. Quick. She had heard threats before. But this one felt different. Because she knew this wasn't just about money. This was about silence. And Naomi Ellis had never been silent in her life. She went to Zara's apartment, looked through her things. Everything was still there. Her laptop, her clothes, her purse. She hadn't packed. She hadn't planned to leave, which meant someone took her. And now Naomi needed to find out who. She reached out to a journalist, a woman named Alicia Carter, who had spent her career exposing corruption. When Naomi told her what she knew, Alicia went pale. You don't understand, she said. This goes beyond Wilkes and Barrett. These people don't just make money, they make governments. Naomi stared at her. Then let's tear them down. Alicia hesitated. Then she handed Naomi a flash drive. Zara gave me this before she disappeared. Naomi plugged it into her laptop, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The files were detailed, names, dates, transactions, but one name stood out above all the others. Senator Richard Callaway, one of the most powerful politicians in the country, a man who had spent his entire career fighting against racial justice. And now he was at the center of a massive financial crime ring, and Naomi had the proof. The next day the threats got worse. Her car was vandalized, her office was broken into, and then she was followed. A black SUV, no plates, always just far enough to stay legal. She went to the police, filed a report. They laughed, told her she was imagining things. She wasn't, because that night her apartment caught fire. Naomi barely made it out. Smoke in her lungs, flames at her back. By the time the fire department arrived, her home was nothing but ash. And that's when she realized they weren't trying to scare her. They were trying to erase her, just like Zara. And if she didn't move fast, she was next. She disappeared, left the city, stayed off the grid, but she kept building her case, kept collecting evidence, kept moving in the shadows, until she was ready. 1 month later, the story broke. Alicia Carter published everything. Naomi's case, the whistleblower's files, the entire corruption ring exposed to the world, and the reaction? Nuclear. Senator Callaway was arrested. So were 2 CEOs from Wilkes and Barrett. The FBI launched an investigation. And Zara, they found her, life, locked in a warehouse outside of D.C. She had been drugged, held hostage for weeks, but she survived. And when she woke up, the first person she saw was Naomi. The trial lasted a year. Callaway tried to fight it, tried to silence Naomi, but she had spent too long being told to stay quiet. She stood in that courtroom, faced the men who had tried to kill her, and told the jury exactly what they had done. And when the verdict came, guilty, Naomi had won. Again, she could have walked away, could have taken her victory and disappeared. But she knew this wasn't just about one case. This was about every black woman who had ever been silenced. So she kept fighting, because power wasn't given, was taken. And now Naomi Ellis was unstoppable.